Hey, well, what's up, Colliders? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here, and the G.I. Joes are back on the big screen. Snake Eyes, G.I. Joe Origins just hit theaters. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So my childhood nostalgia tells me that the G.I. Joe original cartoon series and the action figures are awesome. My adult kind of cynicism tells me that every G.I. Joe live action movie that they've tried to do in recent years has just been absolute garbage. So I was kind of surprised when the trailers for Snake Eyes came out, kind of the first teasers and trailers, that it looked good. It looked really good, more than I didn't have high hopes when I heard they were making it, but it looked like something fresh. It looked something kind of a little more grounded, a little more drama, some cool action. So I was kind of more excited than I thought I would be to go see this movie. I saw it, and it turns out that the cynicism was the right approach. We can't have nice things. This movie stinks. I'll be honest. This is probably one of the worst movies I've seen in quite some time. It is this a mess, and it's too bad because there's actually, if you just sort of strip down to the bare bones of this movie, there's a lot of potential. You can kind of see the hints of what would have been like a really cool kind of revenge action movie, kind of very Asian inspired. Is this sort of all this jumbled kind of mess that they put on top of it that we'll get into that just really sends this thing off the rails. But like I said, there is sort of at the core some interesting ideas. Henry Golding, I'm not really that familiar with him. I didn't see Crazy Rich Asians, which kind of put him on the map. He is definitely a future star. Maybe he's a current star. He can carry the movie. He's a little more kind of coasts on like the coolness factor. He's cool, not necessarily the charisma. I think he's probably a charismatic person, but his character in this movie is just sort of that bad guy, and he's kind of cool and edgy, kind of Han Solo, but doesn't quite have the charisma. But again, he's fine, and sort of the drama, the story they start to set up. It is kind of more, kind of not gritty, but it is more grounded and kind of, you're sucked into sort of the underbelly, kind of, crime, and you're following his journey and, trying to figure out who murdered his father. And again, he's not your typical hero, real good guy, and so at that level, this movie kind of had me excited. I was thinking, hey, this is actually an interesting take on this sort of film, but I don't know what happened. I don't know if they let Cobra in the writer's room, because all the stuff that they just kind of forced on top of it, it wouldn't, to be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if they had like a separate film that wasn't at all connected to the G.I. Joes, and the studios made some decisions to kind of graft on the G.I. Joe element and make this an origin story and kind of work, change it. Because sort of the G.I. Joe part of this does not mesh with sort of the more kind of standalone kind of action revenge movie that they were going for. And the G.I. Joe stuff in this film is just awful. It comes out of left field. All of a sudden, the movie takes a sharp turn, and the Cobra and the G.I. Joe show up, new characters, and they're sort of giving a bunch of exposition dumps and trying to get people caught up to speed on who these characters are. The tone. I get that G.I. Joes are based on a kid's cartoon, so I wasn't expecting some super gritty, realistic. But the G.I. Joe characters in this movie are so cartoonish, so over the top, that I think they would feel like out of place in the cartoon. And the characters, it really does border on like a parody, like a spoof. Like it's the tone is very kind of slapsticky, and the characters, the expressions and stuff. Like it almost makes you laugh out loud to see. And it's too bad, because when it's not bogged down trying to kind of set up and relaunch the G.I. Joe franchise, there's some interesting kind of stuff going on, just sort of drama with the story of the Snake Eyes character, and he gets kind of brought in, given a chance to kind of find a new identity, kind of given a second chance, kind of, brought into this sort of samurai ninja warrior culture, and kind of going through some trials. It kind of reminds me in some ways of The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise, where sort of this character is sort of learning, being taught, and there's some interesting side characters, and they're all good. But again, it feels like there's about 5 different story ideas that they couldn't decide on, all with very different tones, and they just sort of threw up their arms. Hey, what if we just do it all and just throw it together and see what happens? And this is what you get. And something else kind of stands out too. The action. A movie like this needs to have good action, and it has some moments where it's kind of cool, but it's really just not clever. It's not. None of the action scenes really stands out, and it all happens so fast with very kind of shaky, jarring kind of camera movements that you can't really. I saw this movie on the IMAX screen, so it was as big as it could possibly be, and I had a hard time just tracking what was going on. Who was fighting who, what kind of moves they were doing. There's a lot of kicking and swinging swords, and you almost just sort of sit back and just wait for it to end, and then kind of get a lay of the land and see who won and how many bad guys they beat. And even that kind of aspect of it just seems like it's been done so many times before, and this doesn't bring anything new to the table as far as action goes. As far as this content, kind of on the surface to consider, there's one F-bomb, completely unnecessary, not used in any kind of clever way. Just, hey, it's PG-13, we have one to use, so they use it. A couple mild profanities and kind of at least one sexual innuendo. Really not a whole lot compared to most movies like this. Probably less. Take out the F-bomb, less swearing than you would find even in like a Marvel movie. But there's a little bit. Sexuality, there is none. There's no real even just romance or any kind of sexual content, which is, again, refreshing for these types of films. And then violence. There's violence. Lots of guys get killed. Lots of guys get slashed with swords. But it's done without, kind of surprisingly, without any blood or anything gratuitous. It is more kind of cartoony violence in that way. So nothing overly to be concerned about as far as content goes. As far as kind of major themes, again, it's hard to, with a film so jumbled and so kind of thrown together in like a Frankenstein of a film, it's hard to find necessarily a real coherent through line of a theme that gets developed. But I think there's at least a couple that did stand out, and I think they weren't necessarily developed well. They didn't really do it as well as they could have, but I think they were interesting themes to explore. And the first one would just sort of be sin, kind of the weight of sin, and then just sort of judgment, kind of standing in judgment ourselves, standing in judgment over people, and really probably all the main characters in this film, in one way or another, are dealing with sort of harbored grudges for some wrong that happened to them in the past. The villain is several of the protagonist characters. Snake Eyes is kind of dealing with the murder of his father, and all that kind of anger and just sort of rage and this lust for revenge. And so you kind of see the film kind of shows this sort of what sort of that unforgiveness, if you kind of let it linger, the effect that it has. Obviously Snake Eyes being the main character, it is most clear with him. And it's just, you kind of follow his, you almost kind of think of like the Apostle Paul saying, the good that I want to do, I don't do, and the bad that I don't want to do, I can't stop doing. You kind of see that with his character, where he sort of has this chance for a fresh life to kind of overcome some of it, and he keeps kind of getting close to the edge of kind of embracing kind of more of a heroic persona. But his unforgiveness, his anger keeps getting the better of him, kind of keeps pulling him back down into kind of the mire of this life that he can't break out of. And I think it's an interesting theme to show. Just what does that look like when you let that fester? And you kind of see it from different angles. You see kind of a more not a villain, but like a bad guy, and he kind of overcoming some of that and kind of the freedom that comes when you do forgive. And then you see kind of more good characters that aren't able to let go, and they get pulled down to and kind of consumed by it. So it's interesting. Obviously they're not doing it in like a very Christian sense. They don't use the word sin or anything like that. But you definitely see that theme in there. And then judgment, kind of related to that, is this sort of human judgment versus kind of standing in judgment. There's several kind of multiple kind of a repeated beat throughout his characters standing either in judgment themselves or standing over someone kind of kneeling before them and passing judgment. Even just Snake Eyes, he gets his name from a villain that is rolling the dice as his kind of like Two-Face with his coin. And if it comes up Snake Eyes, he's gonna kill you. And it sort of this plays around with a bit of this. It's not up to us to pass judgment over others. That our own kind of human judgment and standards and authority are flawed, and you can't trust him. That ultimately we kind of need to ourselves kind of come before and purify our own heart rather than trying to police people. So again, I think there is definitely some interesting kind of Christian themes in there, even if they don't. The film itself doesn't necessarily develop them super clear. Maybe a final theme that isn't. It's somewhat inconsistent with how they develop it, but it's just sort of the slippery slope of kind of modernization. I think you can see it if you approach this kind of with the lens of like the church and Christianity. The temptation of trying to modernize. They're trying to kind of get with the times. This sort of ancient ninja clan that's kind of protecting people and kind of real traditional, and as they're trying to move into the future, trying to decide how to do that, they start thinking, do we need to kind of adapt? Do we need to kind of adapt to the modern world and give up some of what we have in the past to try and set ourselves up for the future? And the film kind of shows the dangers of that. That when you start down that path of kind of giving up the kind of your core identity to modernize and accept kind of the way the world's going, that it can be a slippery slope where you end up by the end being the very thing that you were supposed to be protecting against. And so it's sort of subtle the way they do that, and I don't want to I can't give more without giving major spoilers for the film, but it did stand out to me as just an interesting kind of topical and timely theme that's in there. So in the end, this movie is not good. It probably plays out like a Cobra propaganda film to stop making G.I. Joe reboot movies. I don't know why they can't seem to crack the code and make it a good movie. This film doesn't know what it wants to be. It doesn't know if it wants to be a real slapsticky cartoon movie or a kind of more gritty, grounded action movie. And it tries to be all of those things and succeeds in being none of those things. So I don't know what the future is. This is supposed to be, as far as I know, kind of a reboot of the G.I. Joe franchise. They're going to have more origin stories. But if that's the case, it is off to a rocky start. But hey, there's always the next film. Maybe they'll finally move in the right direction. I do think Henry Golding is a good actor to build a franchise on. I just feel sorry for him that this is the script and this is the film that he was given to try and do that. But hey, if you guys have seen this film, let me know what you think. If you're a big G.I. Joe person, maybe you caught some references and stuff, or just found more enjoyment kind of in allusions to more of the source material and the original cartoons than I probably didn't catch, having not watched that since I was a kid or had those toys. Let me know what you think. I'd love to just have a conversation. Maybe you saw some other Christian themes in there that I overlooked. But yeah, I encourage you guys, if you haven't done so, subscribe to our channel, keep up with what we're doing. We got a lot of reviews coming up in the next couple of months. We do our live stream, me and Sam, every Tuesday at noon. We love to just dialogue about pop culture and Christianity with you guys. But mostly just stay safe, like this video, and continue to collide with the world for Christ.